Hello and welcome to the Blueprint. I am so thrilled today to be joined by my dear friend, Ashley Jordan. She is an incredible author, speaker, a mother, a former attorney, and a wild, witchy woman that I get to spend time with and am loving every minute. So, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Marley. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I'm so thrilled and honored I've been able to participate in a few instances when you've been able to speak and really share your voice and share aspects of your inner world, which you have shared very publicly with your amazing book, The Unhappy Achiever, which we'll talk about. But I want to talk first, the first time we met, you really went into this wild mystical experience of your awakening. And it's such an incredible story that really speaks to my soul around, realizations of deep remembrance and grief. And so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to just let you share this beautiful and wild story.
Mm. Well, I think my spiritual awakening started at 37, and I think like so many of us, I really felt at that time like my life was figured out. And there was even, I'll say, a sadness around that. Like getting to a point where you're like, wow, I am married. I have my children. I thought I was in my forever home. I was like, my life is played out. Like, this is it. Like, there's no more wondering what will be. Like, it is. And I felt this sadness about it. Like, it felt, which sounds horrible to say because I had a life externally that looked picture perfect. I had done all of the things that we're told will make us happy. I I got married, I had kids, I had the house, the car, like the started from the bottom and we worked our way up and we were in our dream house in a, lovely suburb. And like we had the American dream. And yet, even though everything was externally perfect, internally, I felt empty. I felt unfulfilled. And I didn't know why. I had checked off all of the boxes. And so, at a time when I thought my life was completely figured out, I stumbled into a spiritual awakening when I had an unexpected trigger send me into 24 years of repressed traumatic grief from my childhood. And it was in that space of just grief that I had suppressed coming out, pouring out of me, and in a place of total, almost emotional incapacity. I was incapacitated. I was in so much emotional pain. In that darkness, I started to find my light again. And so I went from an atheist who thought that she knew it all to now today 4.5 years later a woman who is deeply spiritual and connected to herself and know every major aspect of my life is different than it was 4.5 years ago, with the exception of my three children. And now I'll say nothing about my life, with the exception of my three children, is all figured out. so, so that changed because I had built a life, based on external expectations, perfectionism, approval, being a very good girl, and who I was told and taught I should be. And so, this journey for me and this awakening has been about what it looks like when you've built that life from the outside in. And then you have to deconstruct it and rebuild one from the inside out that aligns with your heart and your soul and your spirit and your truest, wildest, witchy woman self, and and kind of what that looks like the magical, the messy, and the in between. And so that's the subject of Unhappy Achiever, and that's the journey I'm still on today.
If you want to help us get the word out on how we collectively imagine a better future, hit like and subscribe, and also consider donating to help us sustain the creation of the blueprint within and these important conversations. Click the link in our bio. You can donate anything on a pay what you can model, and we greatly appreciate it.
I love that so much. And it really mirrors the blueprint's whole, mission or idea that we must heal our inner landscapes to heal our outer environment. And just today, I wrote something while I was doing a workout that was like, if we are in fear in this moment, if we're having a lot of fear from these external things happening within our society, our government, our culture, then we should examine our relationship to change and to death. And
Mm,
I think that, you and I both have examined both of those things, but also become really comfortable with discomfort in the pocket of change, the tension of evolution. And I mean, I feel that sentiment deeply of like everything in my life has changed, but there's so many aspects of my inner world that have deeply improved. But if you're judging based on external societal norms of what valuable life is, or a successful life is, that's not the map I'm working with.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so can you tell us a little bit more about what really led to that grief breaking open and the story of that 24-year long grief, and how
mhm.
that how you were able to process that, and also with deep reverence and respect for like the all-encompassing guttural overtake that it sounds like it had on your body.
Mm. Wow, there's so much in everything that you just said, and I want to talk about the grief. And first, I want to say you're so right when you said that, when we become more aligned internally, sometimes we look a lot less aligned externally based on the standards that are set for us. And I think you can only appreciate what that means, or at least I'll say I can appreciate what that means deeply because, as I said, I had achieved all of the things that were taught, make us aligned externally. I had done all of those things, and I was not aligned internally at all. And so what you realize is that the external will never fulfill you if you are not internally aligned. It doesn't matter what the external looks like if internally you are completely out of alignment. And you also realize that it's not about stuff, it's about love and building a life of love. And so, what that looks like is not necessarily going and taking, for me, the lawyering job, making, six figures plus, 2 to 3 times over every year to do a job that for me was soul sucking and would have, over the course of a lifetime, no doubt made me sick. But taking a job making less money that you love to go to every day, that brings you joy with people who fill you up. And so maybe that means you live a simpler, more modest life. Maybe it doesn't. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that. But it's about deriving alignment and value from the inside out instead of the outside in. And so externally, you may look less aligned, but when you are so internally aligned, you don't care what people think because you're not looking for their approval or their blessing, right? You're living on your own terms, and that's liberation. That's freedom, truly. That's what most of us are really looking for. So,
Absolutely. And I think you become really familiar with this sense of awe of the everyday, the awe and the
Mm.
magnificence of really cultivating your purpose and your identity within it. And so it's
Mhm.
almost like the external world can't touch you in the same way. And if you look at, leaders in consciousness through time, Buddha, so many of these brilliant people kind of took themselves out of society with this, real depth of uh integrating just the magic of all that is, and the magic of the infinite ability to be. But it's funny because I feel really deeply in this life, and just that there's such an importance to being human and being a woman and being down here in it, in the trenches of all that is shifting and awakening and happening. And it's funny because I've been listening to a lot of grief work, and there have been so many amazing quotes, but one of them that I just heard today from my friend Renee Lertzman is, grief is not where we stop, but grief is where we begin. I
Mm.
think that's so different than what we've ever been taught. And, we really, I think, until more recently, as a society, have been taught to subdue all of our emotions outside of the acceptable ones of joy and pleasure and happiness, and to productize ourselves into these productive beings that are here to serve the systems in ways that
Mhm.
we don't let our messiness get in the way.
Mhm. Yes. And I think, to your point earlier, and then I'll share specifically about my own journey with grief and the circumstances of it. But to connect what you just said to your point earlier about those of us who have sort of taken the journey to really explore our internal landscape to the same degree that many of us used to explore the external one and focus on the external one, right? It's a consciousness shift and a shift in intention to really start focusing inside instead of outside. And you realize that, to a large degree, the outside becomes a distraction when it comes to the inside. Like, that's where the good stuff is, because once you work on the inside, your outside just naturally shifts and changes. And so, to your point earlier, though, when we take that internal journey, I always say it is the truest hero's journey. Like, the journey within is the hero's journey that we're all meant to take if we accept the mission. You do have to deal with, the darkness, right? To find the light. As I said before, you have to get comfortable in the messy. It gets messy. It's why butterflies, to turn into the butterfly, you have to go through metamorphosis. And the best way I heard it put was, first you have to be reduced to caterpillar consomme before you can emerge as the butterfly. And so what you said about those of us who have been reduced to caterpillar consomme, and in my case, not just once, but over and over again in the past 4.5 years, you become sort of fearless. You get comfortable being uncomfortable, because we live in a culture that's so concerned with comfort and staying comfortable and not feeling what it would classify as negative feelings, only positive ones, right? It's this toxic positivity. And and so we're sort of taught that it's we should avoid the messy, we should avoid our mess at all costs. And that is so sad, because in the messy we find our magic, in the darkness we find our light. And we also build a tolerance for discomfort, because we realize that growth happens when we're uncomfortable. It actually doesn't happen. If we're growing, we're gonna feel a bit uncomfortable, or sometimes a lot uncomfortable. And so I think that you're right. The current, political, cultural landscape that we're living in is so unsettling for so many who aren't used to stepping into that level of discomfort. And I'm not saying it's not unsettling for all of us. Absolutely it is. But I think, you develop a home within yourself that makes you less susceptible to being shaken by outside forces. You develop a grounded, solidness in yourself. Like it's a, what's the word that I want to use? It is an unshakable sense of self and inner peace and stability. Stability is the word that I want to use, so that when you're living in an era that feels so incredibly unstable, you are able to hold your center. And I'm so grateful for that in this era, because without that, I can't even imagine how I would. The old version of me would be an absolute mess wreck right now in every possible way. And absolutely, it is a difficult time for everyone, or most everyone, I think. But wow, I think, to your point, that's another reason to take the hero's journey, because you develop a strength and stability you cannot imagine without it, that no one can shake, no one and nothing.
Totally. And
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we're in a constant state of comfort and that's what we're seeking. Is that related to complacency with the status quo? Which like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a question. It's not an accusation. But, I think exactly what you're illustrating is that the full spectrum of the human experience is deeply related to grief, and it's related to pain
Mm-hmm.
and sadness. Like, the guarantee of human life is that every single human dies. Like, that is the absolute one, truth. And so rather than meeting each other in our grief and making it a place of love and support and community, how can we think differently and really use it as a part of our own resilience, but also as a mirror and a reflection of our deep love for each other and for
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that we are having this conversation around grief, because it is a topic that as you know, personally has been a huge integral part of my own life's journey and experience. And even the book that I've written, without my experience of grief, I don't think that there would be a book. It's so integral to my life and to who I've become. And stepping into that space of grieving in a way that I wasn't able to when I was 13 years old. And so I guess I'll go back to that. When I was 13, my childhood sweetheart, Daniel, was killed suddenly, tragically, in a terrible accident. And we had been, an important part of each other's lives from the time that we were in the first grade. I think that we have soul connections throughout our lives with people, and with him, it just felt like an instant recognition, even in the first grade. And so, we were just always connected in that way. We just loved each other. And he was a source of unconditional love for me growing up, in a way that I didn't always feel that I was loved. And so his death being so, in its own way, I'll say violent, tragic, a terrible freak accident, on my, basically on my 13th birthday, I attended his
Wow.
funeral, right? And so it was so intense that, without the emotional support, or even the life experience to sort of weather that storm, like so many, I buried it. And that's sort of what you did in the Midwest. We're Midwestern nice and polite, but we really don't know how to deal with hard stuff. And, the adults around me didn't know how to deal with the death of a child, right? I mean, that's so horrific for everybody. And so nobody knew what to do with that. And so they just didn't, they buried it too, for the most part, at least the people around me did. And so I sort of stuffed it away. And when it came pouring out at 37 unexpectedly, I was shocked, because I thought, what's wrong with me? That I literally went from running around like a mad woman, living my life like I was constantly running out of time, to like on my knees overnight. And I thought, like, what the hell is wrong with me? This happened 24 years ago. And I didn't realize that our emotional pain, our trauma, doesn't go away just because we suppress it and don't deal with it. And so one trigger sent me crashing down. And what makes me so sad about the way that our culture refuses to deal with or acknowledge or um, to really give grief, make grief a part of our experience in the way that it should be, is that, as I said, like, in that space of darkness, of being truly in so much pain, that I wanted to be outside of my body. Like, I didn't know you could physically hurt from emotional pain. Um, it stopped me. And in that space of silence, not only did I start to find myself, but what I realized underneath that grief was that it was love. And that love that I thought that I lost at 13, that I thought was ripped away from me, was there for me all the time. And so I remember I took this pilgrimage, is really what it was, although I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I was seeing a therapist, and I said, I'm feeling really called to go to Daniel's grave. It was a Wednesday, middle of the week. I just taken my kids to school, and I had, an appointment with a therapist I was seeing at the time. And I said, I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm feeling really called to get in my car and drive to my hometown, an hour and a half away, and go to Daniel's grave. And she was like, I think that would be a really good idea, because I had never gone. I had never gone to his grave. And so I did. And honestly, Marley, it was one of the most beautiful days and experiences of my life. Because I remember sitting in the grass and crying. And it was like all of a sudden the sun came out like a spotlight. And I just thought, like, it was like I felt 13 again, and I felt sunlight on my face. And I hadn't felt sunlight on my face like that since he died. And so, in that space of darkness, total darkness, literally and figuratively, I felt the light again for the first time.
Oh my gosh. And so wild to also sort of recognize, almost like you're going back to that version of yourself and feeling the things that you didn't
Mhm.
feel at that time. It's really so powerful. And just that it was such a beautiful experience, where obviously it was something you dreaded or you avoided for such a long
Mhm.
time, that really was a gift to your heart, right?
Mhm. 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 Absolutely. And I think it was so funny, because you have to remember, at that time I was still an atheist. I had rejected the religion I grew up with a long time ago. I was not spiritual. And so I was having an experience that I almost didn't have words for.
Mm.
Like, I almost couldn't articulate what I was feeling. And yet I knew it innately. Right. And I knew immediately that day, that feeling was like, like sunlight. I felt 13 again. And so realizing that love, that aspect of me, um, never left me. As I said, it was there for me, waiting all the time. And I didn't lose it, that love. I got to keep it.
Well, and that's what's so interesting. A few years ago, I remember writing and reflecting on this concept of love as like we attribute it to others, giving
Mhm.
it to us or taking it from us, when really that is all within us. Like that, our hearts
Mhm.
are generating those feelings. We own those, those emotions, those energies, they are us. We can work with them, and just because there's an ending, you know it doesn't have to rip that love from our beings. Like we still own that love no matter what, and it's our choice as to how we decide to keep it, work with it, release it, based on the circumstances. So I love
Mhm.
that you were able to really sink into that, and that resonates with me deeply.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. I think, I write about that in the book in a chapter called Best Friends, Burials, and Beloveds. And I say, for so long, to your point, I thought that when he died, like that source of unconditional love, that sunlight on my face was lost forever. And then I realized in that space of grief that no, like it wasn't that light that I saw in his presence that I felt wasn't coming from him. It was my own light reflecting back at me. And so I never lost it. Right. And I also think, you know, the way that the culture doesn't deal with grief and sort of forces, I think, people to bury it, right? Like you have a socially acceptable amount of time to grieve, and it makes people really uncomfortable, and they will sort of, you know, uh, in a way that feels obligatory, hold space for it, but they just kind of want you to hurry up and put a band-aid over it and move on because it's making everyone uncomfortable and nobody really wants to be in that space because we're not taught how. We don't deal with death at all, and so it's something that we fear, and grief then becomes something that we suppress. And what's so awful about that is that the best way, I think, to navigate the experience of grief is to lean into that love,
Mm,
because that's really what it is. And so when I speak to somebody who has had a profound experience with grief and love and loss, one question I always ask is, what was their name? Because I think that names are sacred. And so just getting to say, oh, his name was Daniel, right? Or, in the case of a friend of mine who recently lost her beloved, his name was Michael,
mm.
um, because it honors the fact that that love, right, is still present. And saying the name honors that. And I think is a way to acknowledge that that never died, right?
Yes.
And 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 that is the thing that I think hurts us the most, is that we don't give those who've had a profound experience enough opportunities to honor the love that remains.
And it reminds me, and when we talk in real life, I mean, I deeply have done a lot of reading and research on, past life hypnosis, and this idea that people will come into life together, even for
Mhm.
short moments, because they've experienced deep love in other lifetimes. So even with the tragedy and the knowing that you couldn't, continue with your love story, it's worth it to have even just an encounter with that love, for the sake of it is so infinite.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a question that I have answered for myself, and a question that I've actually asked some other friends of mine who've had, who've lost beloveds, or you know, best friends. And I've said, even if you knew how it ends, would you do it all again? And the answer for myself and for anyone I've ever asked that question to is always without hesitation, yes. Oh my God, yes. And I think the
Oh,
reason why is because on this journey of it really is a journey of coming home to self and self-love, right? And on that journey of heart opening, of alignment, you realize that love is all there is. It's really all there is. And building a life of love, whether it's in your work, whether it's in your friendships, whether it's in your family relationships, whether it's in your romantic partnership, like we have the opportunity and the capacity to build lives of love in every regard, in every possible way. And that's all we're really here to do. Like that is truly all that matters. Love is the greatest legacy most of us can hope to leave behind. You know, even as an author, I don't think writing, you know, an epic best-selling classic is as meaningful as a life like my Daniel had, which is one that, you know, compared to most of us was very short-lived, right? He didn't live to be 13. He was 12. And yet the thought of me, you know, going home to my hometown and whenever I can laying flowers by his grave all of these years later shows that it doesn't take a long life to have a meaningful life. It just takes a life of love. And I always think to myself, what is more beautiful than a life remembered long after its end? Like nothing,
totally.
nothing, right?
And
And so,
I
yeah.
think too, like, you know, the wild part is like love is available to each of us in every infinite moment. Like, it also doesn't have to be sourced or like through a relationship with someone else. Like that also beautiful, that beautiful essence is within us and our connection to nature and our connection to our families and ourselves. And I think, thank you for your amazing, amazing story. And just like you asked people their name, what their name was, I think that is incredibly beautiful. You know, I always ask people, you know, how do you feel them? Or, you know, what's your, do
Mm.
you feel them? Like, where do you feel them? What do you feel? And that unanimously, they always have an instant smile and they have multiple scenarios of how they have developed some sort of communication or language, and that's where the magic is. And that's where I think our version of spirituality and mysticism and this, you know, the unseen world of possibility is so profound because, you know, death as a linear experience is only new within the last 200 years within humanity's, you know, main worldview. And prior to that, it was deeply believed that reincarnation was the only thing. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's also, I think, with grief, you know, the stages of grief, as you mentioned, the five stages are looked at in the same way, in a linear way of thinking, when really you go back and in and out of all different aspects through time and space. And just because you've accepted that the person's no longer embodied doesn't mean that you still don't have, you know, denial, or well, I guess that's actually that's the one you wouldn't have, but depression or, you know, bargaining or just resistance to, or maybe just a deep, deep, deep connection to that love.
Mhm. Well, and I think the best way I heard it put was by a close friend of mine who lost her wife to cancer after 12 years of marriage, and she said she actually went to her dentist who had lost her spouse as well, and she was like, does it ever get easier? Will this ever go away? This grief? And her dentist said, Carrie, It doesn't go away. It just gets different.
Mm.
And that, I think, is so true. Grief never leaves you. It never goes away. It just gets different. It changes.
Mm.
And I think for me, though, the one thing I'll say about, having a profound experience of grief is that the one caution I'll say is that we honor that part of ourselves, that aspect of our experience and our journey. But we also have to remember, and certainly I had to be mindful, that at a certain point that I wasn't identifying myself with grief. Grief has shaped me. It has made me who I am, but I am not grief. I am
Mm.
love. And so it's holding it and honoring it as a part of our journey, but being clear about the fact for ourselves that it is not who we are not our grief, right? And that
Absolutely.
was an important distinction for me to make, that I didn't identify with it so closely that it became me.
Totally. And Frances Weller, who does a lot of work with grief in psychology, talks about the ability to hold grief and gratitude and
Mhm.
hold that tension, but also like the beauty of both. Because absolutely, I think you're right. And two, I think I have been victim. I have been really committed to love stories connected to other lives, timelines, what have you, that really aren't in service to my present
Mhm.
and in
Mhm.
service to my openness to the world and ability to, you know, that it's almost like leaving love outside of yourself, and really needing to just bring that back home. Now,
Mhm.
I really want to talk about unhappy achiever and what took you from this grief, obviously wildly transformative grief experience, and from being this really wildly successful lawyer to I'm going to write this book and I'm going to chronicle all these incredible learnings from my life. How did you get there?
Mm. Well, I had, at the time that I'll say my spiritual awakening started really in earnest in about June of 2020. But I had been writing professionally. I published my first piece in October of 2019. I started writing for newspapers and magazines, and so I was freelance writing at the time. And when I started in 2019, my goal was, like so many writers, to get published by the New York Times. And I sort of told myself, when I do this, I will feel like I have made it, right? I will be I'll be legitimate, I'll feel validated, and then I'll, be easier on myself. And in uh, June, yeah, of 2021, I did it. I published with the New York Times, and instead of feeling the way that I thought I would feel, I felt numb. I
Mm.
didn't feel anything. And so I Googled in a moment of panic, like, what's wrong with me? What does it mean when you achieve a major accomplishment and you feel nothing? And the first article that popped up in my search was, "Are you an unhappy achiever?" And it was like this gut punch moment of, yeah, I think that I am. And I realized that unhappy achiever, that trying to earn love through the external, through being a good girl, through approval, through achievements, that was a lens through which I could view literally my entire life. That I was a young child who internalized what I perceived to be a lack of maternal love and nurturing. And so I decided I could get really good at earning it by being pretty and doing impressive things. And so, as I said earlier, my life just became a perpetual box of to dos and checklists, and going from one achievement to the next, searching for satisfaction and fulfillment, but never finding it. And so that a moment of awareness that I was, that yes, I was an unhappy achiever, set me on, even a different path than the one that I was already on in my awakening. And so I realized shortly thereafter that that was the lens through which I could write this book and tell this story, and that so many others, particularly women, have identified with unhappy achiever because there's so much conditioning for women, especially when it comes to being very, very good girls who grow up to be very, very good women, who are people pleasing, who are perfect, who are pretty. And so it definitely, that sort of aha moment got me, let me know the book that I needed to write, and the stories and the way I needed to tell the stories.
And the book is so incredible. The storytelling, the narrative, the way you write is so is enrapturing. It's so
Oh,
fun. And I know that you've been doing a lot of women's circles with our friend
mhm,
Carrie and
mhm.
bringing the book to life in very experiential ways. And so I would love to know what you've been seeing from women and what you've been hearing and receiving since putting this labor of love out into the universe.
Wow, Marley, I'll say that, I knew since I was truly, since I was in junior high school, I had this deep passion against gender inequity and injustice, and this deep abiding passion for girls and for women, that we needed to be treated, equitably. And and so I always knew I was supposed to do something on behalf of the feminine. And I think before this journey, I thought I knew what that was, and I really had no idea. And thank God, because if I knew the book that I was going to write, I probably would have curled up in a ball, never left my bedroom. So that was by design. We're not supposed to know. And 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 so really now being, 41 years old, having just published this book last September and getting to have conversations with incredible women who are walking their paths with both feet and being their most brazen, big, bold, badass, wild self in the world is just a dream come true. It is the greatest joy, honor, privilege to connect with and hold space for as many women as possible. And I really think that that is my life's work, is to use my gifts of communication, writing, speaking, facilitating workshops, and holding women's circles to illuminate the paths of other women through storytelling, right? And to use my stories as an invitation for other women to tell their stories and to find their own way forward. And that is really what I do. And it's so beautiful because, having just wrapped up a 9-week workshop based on the book, what was so incredibly powerful for me was the way that really manifested, and that it wasn't just me, sharing the book and my stories and facilitating the workshop. It's that when the women in the workshop shared their own stories, that I was learning from them, and they were changing me as much as they were changing through their experiences with Carrie and I and each other. And like, that is the magic that happens, right? Like, they absolutely inspired me in different ways, changed me in different ways. And so I always say, the fact that I will do this work for the rest of my life makes me the luckiest woman in the world. It is what I love to do. It lights me up from the inside out.
I love that as a reflection and as an intention. And it's funny because earlier today, a Lee Harris like short YouTube short came on. I wasn't even like doing anything, but I like him a lot. So I listened, and it was funny because he talked about when he channels, and you, if you're listening and you go into a state of, meditation, or you visualize something, or you go elsewhere, you're receiving exactly what your soul is intended to receive. And so, with you sharing your story and being able to be this storyteller and mirror, it's like it's so interesting because each person receives their own message, or their own iteration, or their own
Mhm.
download, or their own healing of that moment, which is relevant to their soul's experience, and then reflects their story right back to have you receive that exact that transmutation and transformation of energy exchange. It's just like so cool. And even when you're talking, like, I don't have the same story of like the unhappy achiever. I have a different version of it. And it's like,
Mhm.
I definitely had this deep, deep unrest of like, there has to be something bigger to this life. There has to be a bigger meaning and a bigger reason. And similar to where you at 37 were like, you know, not at unrest with all your amazing achievements. I just was like a squirrel, like hunting for like, but what is it, like, what is the thing
Mhm.
that I'm looking for? And really, when I started to look into um past lives and hypnosis, and this spiritual knowing and remembrance of like, oh right, like, we come back over and over, we learn all these things. But really, I think in this iteration too, um, I recall being a kid and being at unrest about, why do we have to go to school all day, every day? Why do our parents work all day, every day? What are they working for? And like, what's the reason? What is what do we receive out of this? And now Brit, my child, is asking me the same questions of like, why do we have to do this? And even when I drop him off at like camp on a day where him and I could just be hanging out, but I'm
Mhm.
doing the do. I
Mhm.
have this same feeling of unrest in my body because I'm just like,
Mhm.
these systems don't make sense to me, and they never have since I was a kid.
Mhm.
So it's interesting, and I love that like you just like jogged all that in my mind in this moment, which is such a testament to how we heal each other, even if our stories are so different. And so,
Mhm.
it's
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, yes. Because I always say, even though the facts and circumstances of our lives and our stories may differ, no human experience is truly unique. And so we're always able to see ourselves in other people's stories and find resonance and meaning, right? And inspiration and healing. And so that's what's so beautiful, is that when we are brave and courageous enough, because to share our stories, especially our most vulnerable ones, is a courageous act, right? We hear the word authenticity thrown around a lot now in the mainstream, but when it really comes down to it, I think that, true authenticity, true vulnerability is still so outside of the norm and what is most common and acceptable, that it makes people uncomfortable sometimes. And so to really put yourself out there, to be brave and courageous enough to speak your truth and tell your story and share your heart, is the most courageous act of vulnerability and true strength. You know, as a woman who used to pride herself on the fact that she never cried, and even at 6 years old, broke her arm, had, bone hanging out, and didn't shed a single tear. And I think back, like, wow, even at 6, I had already learned to like suck it up, right? That was because we were taught that strength. And I always say, now I realize that the opposite is true. it takes so much more strength to cry. It takes so much more strength to allow ourselves to feel it all. And we can't really be alive unless we are brave enough and bold enough to feel it all and to share those experiences of feeling it all with one another and hold space for it. Um, and that's the thing. It's like so many of us are looking like whether we know it or not. I look back at the me that I was 5 years ago, and God, I just wanted to feel something more than
Mhm.
nothing. And I didn't know how. I had numbed myself so deeply and for so long that I felt nothing, right? I didn't feel pain, but I didn't feel joy. And
Yeah.
my God, that's like being a member of, like, that's like being, a member of the Walking Dead every day. And so when we look at, I think, so many of our society's vices and some of the worst aspects of addiction and things like that, for so many of us, it's not just a suppression of pain, but it's a desperate desire to feel something more than nothing.
Absolutely. And it's wild that you say that because yesterday I thought about, I think I didn't cry for 15 years and I really was wearing it as a badge of honor. And there's so much truth in your statement of it takes a lot of bravery. It takes so much bravery to look within yourself and look at the parts you've been avoiding for maybe your whole life and see those with love and let them express in ways that can shatter your heart over and over. But
Mhm.
truly, like that heart-shattering experience is also life. Like it is that
Yeah.
life that we seek. And I love that so deeply because I think some of my most transformative moments have also been in the depths of heartbreak. Like absolute
Mhm.
heartbreak. And in ways there's reasons why we write sad songs. Like we want to feel the spectrum of all of
Mhm.
these beautiful, beautiful things. So
Mhm.
thank you so much. And as far as like I know that every woman circle and every healing circle or any type of group scenario I've been in, there's always times where, someone's story over here is it's really penetrating everyone, of course, but it's like directly relevant and helpful to at least like three people. It's like everybody is there in divine guidance to be, this mirroring and kind of this spiral of healing. And so I guess I want to just say to anyone that's out there that's just nervous or hasn't done it or doesn't know where to begin, both of us 5 years ago, 4 years ago, had not begun. Like, even if you
Mhm.
feel that it's so deep and it is so unreachable, it is always reachable. And there's beautiful community and women and men and people of all different types holding space and ready to support.
Mhm.
But I want to ask you, you are such a creative and heart-led human. What is on your, like, what are you seeing and feeling for your next creative processes?
Mm. I think it's so interesting because, I worked on from writing to publication. The book was a 3-year journey. And so, when the book came out, there were so many, it was overwhelming in a way. And not just because, a book that reads like my diary with my most sacred stories is out in the world as an offering and an invitation for anyone to read. But it was also because I had poured so much of myself into this creation and now it was created. And so the leg of the journey where it was all about creating this offering that I was so called, that I knew was my destiny with every ounce of my being to create and to put out into the world. Once it was out, it marked the next leg of the journey, right? And so it wasn't, no longer was it going to be me in my fuzzy socks on my couch with my laptop, like telling stories in my head and plugging away. Now it was about being out in the world with these stories. And I'll say I love both parts of the journey. But this part of the journey is particularly gratifying because the whole point is to share these stories to uplift and inspire other women to live more empowered, freer lives. And so now it's not so, I guess the creation aspect is how to use this book a as a tool, as a bridge between women, and as something that inspires connection, and to share it with as many of the women who need it as possible. And so it's about doing workshops and speaking and getting to do interviews like this. And it's such a joy. I get to meet so many amazing women who are on the same journey. And again, even though all of our facts and circumstances are different, none of our experiences are truly unique, no matter what our lives have looked like. If you are out there making changes, big or small, and that's what I want to say, you know, Marley, you and I have made some really big changes, but but our journeys aren't going to look like everyone else's, right? And so if you don't have to leave your 15-year marriage, you don't have to just go out and quit your job. If you are making changes big or small, you are walking your path with both feet. And so if you make even one small change, what I know for sure is it will lead to the next and the next and the next, as long as you are following your big, beautiful heart and living into what you're called to do, right? You
Yes.
will watch the universe line up to support you in magical ways. The people who are meant for you will find you. When I get asked, why do this? Why take that journey? I always say, because, nearly 5 years after I've begun, I've never, and now as a single woman for, the past 2 years, and the first time pretty much in my entire life, I've never had more unconditional love in my life. Never. And I've never been more free or more myself than I am today. And so that is why it's worth it.
Wow, beautiful. That is like a mic drop moment. Thank you so much, Ashley. What a beautiful experience. And can you please tell everyone where they can find you, find your book? I know it's everywhere, but and just any other thoughts? But I love that.
Aw, yes, absolutely. You can find my book, Unhappy Achiever, Rejecting the Good Girl Image and Reclaiming the Joy of Inner Fulfillment, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available on Audible. It's available on Kindle, all the places books are sold. So,
Amazing. And I'm really excited to see all the things that are going to come from these next phases. And it's almost unfair to me to even be like, what's your next vision? Because 3 years of birthing a book that is literally such a beautiful personal
mhm,
sharing of um, absolute, like, wild stories, but also this full spectrum of the human experience in many, many ways, is a huge, huge labor of love. And I know even just doing the blueprint, there have
mhm,
been times where I've been really, really in dark places around my own vulnerability. So I can
mhm,
imagine that there had to be a lot, almost like, some really challenging parts of that also.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. I think, it's so funny because I realized, Marley, you know, w- as I always say, that healing is like an onion. It is layered. And as soon as you heal one layer, the next layer sort of waits at the ready to be healed. And so it isn't linear. Like healing isn't linear. It is complex and layered, and there are many different layers. They'll say, if you really want to accelerate your healing journey as a recovering unhappy achiever, publish a book for the world with your most personal stories. Because, no matter what we do, and especially when we do our most inspired, heartfelt work, we are not going to be for everyone, right? And so self-love is saying, I know who I am. I love myself. I'm proud of my heart, my love, and my journey and my sacred stories. And they are intended for those who are meant to receive them and who will find meaning and resonance and inspiration and healing. For those they don't resonate with, they should absolutely never read that book. They should go find what resonates with them. And so I think that's the beautiful thing. Like, we have to understand that your most authentic self, whether you write a book or not, isn't going to be for everyone, but it's for you. And it's going to be for the people who love you and see you. And that's going to be reflected not just in your personal life, but your professional one. And I think that that is the freedom, is that when we write, truly inspired work from the right place creatively, we can't worry about who's going to like it and who's not. We have to dance in that space of creation like nobody's watching. And that's the spirit with which I wrote the book. When I was writing, I was dancing like nobody was watching, and I never thought about who was going to read it. And so I always say, if it doesn't resonate, please go find something that does. And
I I cannot even, like, recently I had someone kind of criticize, my Instagram presence, and I was kind of like, like, it's your choice if you want to watch. Like, you do not have to watch. This is not public, but I think that speaks to the what I've had to do a lot of work around in relationship, and just with um the idea even of dating post being
Mhm.
unwed, is
Mhm.
like how much I used to source my own feelings about myself by the way someone else felt about me. And
Mhm.
that is not at all how sturdy, solid relationships are built, you know? So, thank you. Thank you for sharing and for that reminder, because I
Mhm.
think we're almost taught sometimes societally to care about what everybody else is gonna think. And it's like, no, if you're coming from a place of your soul's work, that's it. That's all she
Mhm.
wrote.
Mhm. And I think too, it's like I always say, when I talk to women, so many say that they're looking for truly authentic relationships with other women, true sisterhood. And I'll say 5 years ago, I thought I knew what that was. And I had no idea, because I always say you can't have what you can't hold. And I wasn't authentic. I didn't even know myself. So I couldn't love myself or be myself. Like, I didn't even know truly who I was. I thought I did, but I had no idea. I'd lost her so long ago trying to be who I thought everyone wanted me to be, the woman that I thought would be the most lovable,
Mm.
right? And what I always say is, the more ourselves we become, the more our people find us, whether it's romance, whether it's our work, whether it's our sisterhood, our friendships. And it's just the truth. Like, we didn't know each other 5 years ago. Most of the women in my circle, almost all of the women in my closest inner circle, my sisters, I did not know 5 years ago, when I did not know myself. And so whether it's romantic love or the love between friends, or even in your own work, the more yourself you become, the more your people will find you.
Absolutely. And for anyone that's curious about how to really come to yourself, it's really about taking time in silence and
Mhm.
you know, things like journaling, meditating, going into nature, you know, and doing things that you loved when you were a kid that were like your flow states, so you can remember who you are. But it is, you know, you're never lost. You're always in there, you know, you're always in there. It's just the layers of the onion, which really are like our programmatic beliefs and societal norms. It's not you, it's not your soul's essence, you know, that it's
Mhm.
always there. So, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
Ashley, thank you so much. We could talk for days. This
We
is so,
totally could talk for days, and luckily we get to sometimes, so.
yes, and I can't wait for the next time. Thank you so much for joining us. We will put all of your links to everything in the show notes, and I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, same, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.